We're going to be reading this morning. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 2. And I'm going to read the first 12 verses of Matthew chapter 2. Very familiar passage. Probably heard it quite a bit over this Christmas season. And I'm going to be reading from the New International Version, if you'd like to follow along. Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." King Herod heard this. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen, when it rose, went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. Well, here we are. We are here at the last Sunday of 2024, and we have another Christmas day that has come and gone. And I mean, I don't know about you. I know many of us love this time of year. I really love this time of year. I'm a big fan of Christmas. I love the lights. I love the music. I love the special things that we get to do with friends and family. And of course, I do enjoy gifts. I enjoy getting gifts, but I enjoy giving gifts as well. And I especially enjoy like as a parent over the years, I'm sure many of you parents out there, you have this experience where you watch your kids open the gifts that they get on Christmas morning, and they get super excited about what they're opening and the whole process, and it's just a lot of fun. Although, over the years, from time to time, there has been an experience that I've had as a parent, and I'm wondering if there are any parents of younger kids this morning that might be brave enough to admit something, that if you had this experience this Christmas. How many of you here this morning with younger kids had one of your kids receive a gift from maybe another friend or another family member or a grandparent that maybe you would have wished they didn't receive? You ever have one of those? Any brave parents that would admit that? Okay, a couple, okay. The rest of you are liars, but that's fine. And you know the gifts I'm talking about, right? These gifts fall into a few different categories, all right? So category one is they are loud, all right? They're loud gifts. And so you watch them open it up, and it has maybe it has like a little sample button that they can press, and you hear it, and you're like, oh, that's the sound I'm going to be hearing, or that's the song I'm going to be hearing over and over and over and over again in my house for quite some time. Loud gifts. Category two, they are messy. You're going to be finding the remnants of this gift all over your house every time it comes out, and it's going to require more cleanup time than even play time. You're just like, oh, this is fantastic. Things with sand or slime or glitter, right? I mean, if you get a gift with glitter, glitter's just in your house for the rest of your life. Like, it's not going anywhere. You're going to find it forever. You can never completely get rid of glitter. Category three is a gift. It requires a lot of assembly. The box opens up and you immediately look at it and you're like, I know what the next 2 to 3 hours of my day are going to look like to be putting this thing together. Category four is a gift, any gift that requires sort of an additional subscription, or you have to buy other things for the gift to be usable. A lot of video games are like this now, where you, like used to, when I was a kid and I played video games, you bought a game, everything that you needed to play the game was just in the disc, and you could play it, and it was all based on your achievement. Now you buy a video game, and there's like other characters that you have to buy in order to play with them, or you have to buy other pieces to be able to play with the game, or you have to subscribe to something to be able to play with the game adequately. And then there's category 5, anything that you need to keep alive. Here's the rule with living gifts, right? So they should only be given by the parent or guardians who are going to have to shoulder the responsibility of caring for that gift when the recipient does not do it. All right, that's the rule. You know, we had an example of one of these gifts that our kids received many years ago. It was not actually alive, but it felt that way. And I don't even necessarily remember at this point who gave this gift, but it was this tiny little toy pet turtle. It was like an inch and a half big, and it came with this little like purple circular pond that it would like didn't have water. It had like a picture of water in it, and I took more time than I care to admit looking online to try to find a picture of this toy, and I could not find it. But it had this little, and it magnetically sort of moved around in the little pond, which in and of itself would be fine. But then it also made weird noises that would let you know when it was time to like pay attention to it or feed it or something. It was like the like, in case you know, that's the noise a turtle makes when it wants to annoy the parents of its owner. So it would make that noise just randomly. But here's the thing about this gift. It did not have an off switch. Like I looked for it. I could not find an off switch anywhere. So the way where we were living at that time, our kids' rooms were upstairs. Our room was downstairs, and the room where most of our kids' toys were like right next to our bedroom. So 3 o'clock in the morning, you'd be sleeping and you're like coming from the other room. And when you hear that noise at 3 o'clock in the morning, it is unnerving. So, and these little squeaks would come from this fake pet turtle, and I tried a lot of things to stop this thing from making noise. Things that voided the warranty of this particular toy. And I could not figure it out. It just kept going until one day it just mysteriously got lost. Still don't know what happened to it. Still can't find it. But it was a sad day. I think if you have kids, we've likely been there at some point. And the thing about these gifts, the things that makes them so frustrating, is that they are so disruptive. They disrupt our lives. They disrupt our convenience. They disrupt our schedule. They disrupt our sleep. They disrupt our peace and our cleanliness. And it's incredibly frustrating. So just something to take heart. If you're buying gifts for children that are not yours, stay away from these 5 categories. That is, unless maybe you're trying, like somebody bought one of these gifts for your kids and you want to get back at them for doing that, then by all means, the gloves are off, go for it. Now, it's certainly true that gifts that disrupt our lives can be incredibly frustrating. What is also true, though, is that some of the greatest gifts that we receive in life are often the most disruptive, right? Marriage, for one. Marriage is an incredible gift, but it disrupts your life in some pretty significant ways, right? If you continue to live the way you did as a single person, as a married person, you're going to run into some problems with that. But it is a great gift, but it disrupts your life. Children are a pretty disruptive but amazing gift. A pet is a pretty disruptive gift. A new job, a new home, a new relationship. All of these things can be amazing gifts, but are going to be pretty disruptive to your lives in some pretty significant ways. And they all disrupt our lives in very similar ways. There's kind of a theme to it. They pull our focus to some degree off of ourselves and put it on someone or something else. So we've been spending time over these past few weeks celebrating the gift of Jesus at Christmas time. And we've been working through this series that we have entitled A Better Story. And as we've been doing this, we've been talking about the ways that the story of the coming of Jesus is a better story than the other stories that we may look to define our worlds and our lives. And we've talked about how the coming of Jesus is the story of a better light, and the story of a better promise, and the story of a better name. And this morning, as we wrap up our series, we're going to be talking about how in Jesus, we have the story of a better gift. And I think we celebrate Christmas and we think about Jesus, we think about the gift of Jesus, but oftentimes I think we are a bit confused about the type of gift that Jesus really is to us and our world. When we celebrate the Christmas story, we oftentimes celebrate a Jesus that comes to the world to bring things like calm and peace and encouragement to our lives. And while those things are certainly true, the calm and the peace and these things that Jesus brings are a calm and peace that can only really be found on the other side of some pretty significant disruption to our lives. And this is the big idea of our story of a better gift this morning, is that Jesus is the gift that disrupts our self-centered world. When we think about Jesus as a disruptive force in society, many of us probably, our minds might immediately go to some of Jesus's teachings, right? Some of his more famous teachings: love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, forgive 70 times 7. We think about those types of things. And it's true, Jesus does call us to live in some pretty countercultural ways, in some unnatural ways. But the disruptive impact of the coming of Jesus doesn't begin with his ministry. It began with his very arrival into the world. Have a look back at the words we just read in Matthew chapter 2, verses 2 and 3, where the Magi come and they ask Herod, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. There's quite a bit of disruption referenced in this passage. I mean, first, and we can overlook this pretty easily, we have the arrival of the Magi themselves, right? And to really understand the disruption here, we have to have an understanding of who these Magi were. The word Magi is from the word magos, which was originally the title of a Persian priestly caste who played an important role in advising the king. It also applied more widely to learned men and priests who specialized in things like astrology and the interpretation of dreams, and in some cases, magical arts. Astrology is likely a large part of what these particular Magi's role was, because of the fact that they were following a star that led them to Jesus. Now, this word magos, when used in Christian and Jewish context, is not typically used in a positive sense. You know, we use it in singing at Christmas time as like this title of honor, but it wasn't really looked at. These people wouldn't really have been looked at in a way where they would have been honored in Jewish religious culture. Other places where we find this word used is Acts 13 to describe a sorcerer named Elymas who opposed Barnabas and Saul on one of their missionary journeys. The word that's used for sorcerer in that passage is the same word that's used for Magi in Matthew chapter 2, this story that we sing about and we sung about this morning. Even though we sing, we three kings, it's likely they weren't kings. There may or may not have been three of them as well. But these are types of magicians or astrologers that might serve in the court of the king. But all of that is to say, these are not people that you would expect to be coming in search of the Jewish Messiah. But their lives are disrupted by the appearance of this star, and their arrival in Jerusalem will be a pretty disruptive sight in light of the fact that they were very much outsiders to religious Jewish life. So the news of the birth of the King of the Jews begins to be told, it begins to be spread, and then we have Herod, who is understandably very disturbed by this. He is the king of the Jews. The birth of another king certainly threatens him, but something I think we also often skip over in this passage is the next few words of this verse. Herod was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. Who are these people? Who is all Jerusalem, right? It's the Jewish people. People who are supposedly looking and longing for the coming of the Messiah. This should be amazing. They should hear King of the Jews. This should be amazing. They should be celebrating in the streets. They should be holding parades. But they're disturbed. Why would the Jewish people in Jerusalem be disturbed by the possibility of the coming of the Messiah? And we aren't really given any sort of clear answer in Scripture about this, but we can make some guesses. I mean, maybe fear of what Herod's reaction is going to be. Maybe they had gotten pretty used to the status quo under Herod and feared what change could look like. One thing we do know about Herod as a non-Jewish ruler of the Jewish people, he did quite a bit to curry the favor of the Jews and the religious leaders. He did a lot of favors. He funded the temple. There was likely a fair amount of comfort with the current state of affairs. Regardless of the specifics, it's pretty clear that they know that this announcement, this proclamation, this search is going to be disruptive to their lives in some pretty significant ways. And it doesn't take long for that to come to fruition as Herod takes some drastic action when he realizes that the Magi will not be returning with news of the location of Jesus. As we read Matthew chapter 2, verses 16 through 18, a little bit later than what we read this morning, when Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious. And he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. The coming of Jesus into the world was not a calm and peaceful event at the outset. It was a disruptive event that almost immediately began to turn people's lives upside down. So if I come to you and I say, hey, I have a gift for you, and you might be a little curious about what is it? Like what you want to know more? And I tell you, if you accept this gift, it's going to disrupt your life in some pretty major ways. It may make life harder for you. It's going to require you to make some significant sacrifices. Change the status quo of your life in some pretty major ways. Disrupt a good amount of your comfort. Make you change some of your priorities. Maybe rearrange some of the values in your life. You'd probably tell me, no, thank you. I don't want that at all. I'm pretty good with the way things are. But this is the thing. That's the thing about gifts sometimes, and specifically the gift of Jesus. Oftentimes the gift we need isn't always the gift that we want. And the rest of our time this morning, we're going to look at some of the ways that the story of the gift of Jesus is a story of a better gift because it presents a disruption in our lives. But it's a disruption that we so desperately need. And in doing this, we're going to take a look at the three gifts that the Magi bring to Jesus, because each of these gifts are also symbolic of some pretty core elements of who Jesus is and the type of disruption he is to us as this gift. As a reminder of these gifts, let's look at again at Matthew chapter 2, verse 11. Coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. When you get down to the root of what most people say they want in life, apart from Christ, apart people who aren't following Jesus, apart from what Jesus wants to do in our lives, I believe that they would fall into three categories. Number one is I want to believe that I am good and worthy. I want to believe that I have value. Number two is I want to believe that I am capable and competent, that I am able to handle my life. And number three, I want to believe that I am in charge. I am the one that's in charge and in control of my life. And something we see with each of these gifts is that the gift of Jesus really flies in the face of all of these human desires to some extent. Let's first look at the gift of myrrh. In the gift of myrrh, we can see that Jesus is the sacrifice that disrupts our self-worth. Now, to understand this, need to have a bit of an understanding of what is myrrh. Well, myrrh is not a thing that we talk about all that much. We sing about it at Christmas time, but we probably don't spend a lot of time thinking about what myrrh is. Myrrh was a resin that was used in embalming and preparing bodies for burial in ancient times. Pretty strange gift for a new kid coming into the world. You imagine like you just had a baby and somebody shows up, here's some embalming fluid for you. Like that would be really weird. So this is one of the gifts that is brought to Jesus. This gift symbolizes mortality, and it foreshadows Jesus' suffering and death. This gift is pointing us to his sacrificial role as the Lamb of God who would die for the sins of the world. And this gets at a question. Where do we find our value as people? I think that with the prevalence of social media in society, it's shown us a lot of things about human nature and about human beings as a whole. But perhaps one of the most significant about them is how badly we as people seek out validation of other people for our own sense of self-worth. For some, to the extent that they will just even make things up for the purposes of garnering validation and attention. And so I want to share a few examples of some well-known social media posts that have making the rounds over the years that people posted for a sense of feeling self-worth that almost immediately people looked at and thought, this looks suspicious, and came out in the comments. This first one, I don't know if you could see this all that well, but this is a picture of the White Rabbit from Alice in Wonderland. And the person's comment says, has the quote, the hurrier I go, the behinder I get. And then they said, I drew this as their comment. Not too far down, we have another person says, your name is Claire Stevenson, because they quick Google search, they were able to find the original artist for this drawing, whose name was Claire Stevenson, who was not the person who posted this picture. So immediately, this guy posts this picture, claims that they are the artist, and are immediately called out. Then we have this guy, posted a picture, this snowboarding picture, claims that this is him doing a flip on a snowboard. And he gets some initial comments talking about how amazing this is. Wow, that's awesome. But then a couple of comments down, we have a guy that posts, this is from a calendar. And it's literally the first image that comes up if you do a Google image search of guy doing a flip on a snowboard. And he immediately gets called out for that. But this is my favorite one, though. This person posts to Facebook that they're scared because someone is trying to break into their house. Now, you may reasonably be wondering, as their commenters are wondering, why are you posting this on Facebook and not calling the police? To which the original author of the post replies that they don't have their phone on them. Now, those of you, if you've used Facebook, you generally are using it from your phone, to which somebody also commented that your post says it was posted from your phone. The extent that we will go to feed our sense of self-worth can sometimes be deeply unhealthy and concerning at times. Now, most of us probably aren't doing things like this where we're making up things and posting them to social media, but we all kind of have our own ways of seeking out our value and seeking out ways to build our worth that is centered on ourselves, right? Maybe we want to be the most successful in our career, or we want to be the best parents, or we want to be the best students, or the best athletes, or we want to be the best dressed, or drive the nicest car, or have the best friends. Whatever, we all have our own thing. And it's not necessarily wrong to want some of these things, but when our worth and our value is wrapped up in them, we are missing out on the truest and most fundamental and most authentic indicator of our value and worth. And that is this, that God gave his son as a sacrifice for you. From the day of his birth, it was the plan. The Magi arrive later, and they give him myrrh, a symbol of his future death, as a sacrifice for you and me. God created you in his image. We bear his image. He loves you. You are so valuable to him that he sent his son for you. You and I don't need to build our sense of self-worth. And if we're honest, none of our efforts to build our sense of self-worth really work in the long run. Someone is going to outperform you. Our kids will have tantrums, public embarrassing ones in the middle of a store. Relationships will end. All of these building blocks of our self-worth and are frail and will eventually crumble, leading us to feel worthless in some sense. We need to find our worth in the one who gave himself for us. It is this authentic value that disrupts the frivolous sense of value and worth that we seek out elsewhere. Next, let's have a look at frankincense. In this gift, we can find the gift of salvation disrupts our self-sufficiency. Again, we need to take a step back and know what is frankincense. Again, something we sing about that we don't talk about. Frankincense was associated with the work of priests who burned it as part of their duties, interceding on behalf of the people to God. It was used as incense in the worship of God. In the Jewish temple, it was burned on the altar as a fragrant offering representing the prayers of the people rising to God. And this gift highlights Jesus' role as our great high priest, as we read about in Hebrews chapter 4, the one who would bridge the gap between humanity and God through his life, death, and resurrection. By presenting frankincense, the Magi acknowledged Jesus' divine nature and his role as the ultimate mediator between God and humanity. In the sacrifice of Jesus that we just spoke about, we see how valuable we are to God. The reason that this sacrifice was necessary was because of the reality that our sin creates a gap between us and God that we cannot overcome. But we as human beings don't really Okay, a couple of people out there, a couple of brave souls, maybe a couple of closeted ones out there. But if you're a Star Trek fan, you might know what I'm talking about when I say the phrase Kobayashi Maru. All right, a couple of nods. Thank you. We're geeks together. It's awesome. For those of you who are unschooled in the universe of Star Trek lore, the Kobayashi Maru refers to a training simulation that Starfleet command officers were required to go through that involved having to fly their ship into enemy territory in order to save another ship that was in distress. The scenario, though, was programmed in such a way that it was impossible to succeed. It was called the no-win scenario. No matter what the captain did as part of this training exercise, their ship ended up being destroyed, and the ship that they were trying to rescue ended up being destroyed, no matter what. Because the purpose of the training exercise was not to see whether or not the trainee could win. The purpose was to evaluate how the trainee would act and respond in a no-win situation. Now, in 2009, the reboot of the Star Trek films, Captain Kirk decides that he cannot accept a no-win scenario, and he hacks the computer running the simulation and changes it so that he can win, leaving his evaluators kind of shocked by this. And Captain Kirk, right, he's the hero of Star Trek, of the Star Trek story. The man who cannot accept the no-win scenario. The man who cannot accept being in a helpless state. And it's this type of never give up, I can do it attitude that we hold in such high esteem in our culture and in our world, and we celebrate it. There has to be a way. There has to be something I can do. I have to have some power and control over this situation. But the problem is, when it comes to our relationship with God that has been broken by our sin, there is truly nothing we can do. We are in a no-win situation. We are helpless. We need someone to step into this gap as an intercessor between us and God. And this is Jesus, as Paul writes in Romans chapter 5, verse 6, and this is the New American Standard Version, "For while we were still helpless, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly." While we were still helpless, Jesus steps into the gap between us and God as our great high priest. And he's not offering the sacrifices of rams or goats or bulls, but of himself. And in that sacrifice, his righteousness is then placed on us. Again, the words of Paul in 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians 5, God made him who had no sin, Jesus, to be sin for us, the sacrifice, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Righteousness had to literally be placed onto us, not our own, but Jesus's. As human beings, though, we want to be self-sufficient. We so badly want to earn our way. The gift of Jesus disrupts this thinking with the reality that we are in a helpless state. And it is only through him bridging the gap between us and God that we can be made truly righteous. It's only in surrendering our pursuit of self-sufficiency and accepting Jesus' sacrificial intercession on our behalf that we can truly ever be made sufficient by Jesus. And a possible objection someone might be thinking as we talk about our need for Jesus to disrupt our sense of self-sufficiency might go something like this. They might think, I don't know, helpless, that feels a little harsh. I feel like I'm a pretty good person. I try to be honest. I try to be helpful. I try to be kind to most people. And I hear that, and that sounds understandable. But I think what it really comes down to is the standard that we measure ourselves against. Because for most of us, we could probably find someone else in life that we could point to and feel like we're better than that person. I'm not as bad as that guy over there. Just like as the parable that Jesus tells in Luke 18, we got the Pharisee and the tax collector, right? Where the Pharisee prays, "Thank you, God, that I am not like other people, like this tax collector over there." But here's the problem. That's not the standard. That's not the standard that we're measured against. When I was 12 and 13 years old, I was at a summer camp. And I played a good amount of tennis during those years. And there was an instructor there where we would have like tennis lessons every day, and he taught us. And I started to get pretty good, in my own opinion. How good I actually won a tournament against the other kids my own age. And I started to get a little cocky, and I decided to challenge my instructor to a tennis match. And I realized at that moment that I'd never really seen how good my instructor was at tennis when he was just like hitting the balls back and forth to us. No exaggeration, he started off serving. I did not move. I hadn't moved my feet or my racket by the time the ball had bounced in and hit the fence behind me from his serve. And I realized how insufficient I was at tennis. Like when the standard is changed, our standard for righteousness and holiness is not other people. Our standard for righteousness and holiness is God. That's the standard. And as Paul tells us pretty clearly in Romans chapter 3, he says, "For all have sinned and fall short, not of other people, not of the average, not more good, fall short of the glory of God." That's what we fall short of. And only in Jesus do we find our true value, and are we made truly sufficient, because that's the standard. And this brings us to the final gift, the gift of gold, in which we find the gift of sovereignty disrupts our self-determination. So gold was often associated with royalty and wealth, and it's commonly given as a gift to honor kings. So by presenting gold to Jesus, the Magi are acknowledging his identity as the promised king, the Messiah, who would reign over God's kingdom forever. As I reflect on this a little bit more, I feel like we can more accurately say that the gift of Jesus, the gift of sovereignty, disrupts our illusion of self-determination. Because I don't know if I'm alone in this, but the older I get, the more I realize how little of my world that I'm really in control of. When I was first exposed to Jesus as a teenager, I remember I was at this weekend retreat that I was invited to, and the retreat counselor had shared the gospel with me, and I had accepted the gospel. I was all, forgiveness in heaven, that's great. And but then he said, asked me like, do I want to surrender my life to Jesus? 16 years old, he's asking me this question. And I said, no, thank you. I was good. I'm good. I like forgiveness. I like the idea of heaven. That all sounds really good to me. This whole someone else being in charge of my life, I am not okay with that. I wasn't just about to give up control of my life. I had this idea that the moment I gave up control of my life to God, it was going to be, all right, I'm going to put you in the situation where you're going to be miserable. And that was my idea. A year or so later, I was having lunch at a friend's house after church, and her father asked what I wanted to do when I was older. And I talked through my ideas of where I wanted to go with my college and whatnot. And he said, I can see you as a pastor. I laughed out loud in his face. Not in his face. I didn't get up in his face. That would be weird. But I laughed at him. I mean, that would be really rude. But I laughed in that moment. I literally laughed out loud. I wanted control of my life. As I've grown older, I realized how laughable that idea is as I realize more and more things that are not just outside of my control, but outside of even my awareness. It's kind of like trying to drive a car and you can only see, the entire car is blacked out except for maybe like a 2x2 inch square that you can see through. That's kind of what it's like trying to navigate and think that I'm in control of my own life. My perspective is so limited. It's impossible to navigate life without someone who sees the whole road, who sees everything. I need a better driver. I need a king. Not a human king that's frail and fallible and just as corruptible as me. I need a king who knows all and sees all and can be trusted. And Jesus' kingship isn't just about authority, even though authority is a big part of it. It's about his perfect love and care for us. When we surrender to him, we're not relinquishing to a tyrant like I feared way back at the beginning, where I feared that God's going to make me miserable. We're not relinquishing control to a tyrant. We're entrusting our lives to the one who knows us fully and loves us completely. So if you're someone here this morning and perhaps you're skeptical about this idea of following Jesus and surrendering to Jesus, maybe you might have an objection, and perhaps something you might be asking is, okay, so how is this different, right? Every major religion has this idea. I fall short, I'm not good enough, I need to surrender, I need to follow, whatever this particular religion's version of God is. That's the idea. What is the big difference between Christianity and all these other things? Well, one thing I would offer you in response to that is that in Jesus, we have the only offer of a solution to our problems. A solution to our problems of sinfulness and insufficiency. Jesus is the only one who entered our world. We have the only one who provides us with the promise to live in us and walk with us and empower us to live the life he is calling us to live. We have the only one who gave himself up for us to make us sufficient. Out of love for us, Jesus doesn't just place demands on us. He entered our world. He gave himself to make a way for us to be brought back into relationship with God. He enters our world and disrupts our lives because he loves us. As Paul writes in his letter to the Ephesians, after talking about all the ways that we as people fall short of living up to the standards of the holiness of God, he writes these words in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 4 and 5. But because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ. Even when we were dead in transgressions, it is by grace you have been saved. In Jesus, we have the only offer to be made alive again. And this is the main point, right? God's disruption of our lives is not an act of cruelty or meanness. It is an act of love. When I was in grad school in my counseling program, we had to take several classes on marriage and family counseling, and we would talk about family dynamics, we would talk about parenting, and in one of these classes, we discussed one of the main responsibilities of a parent. And I loved the way that this was put, and it's stuck with me ever since. And it was described this way. One of the main responsibilities of a parent is to disrupt the self-centered beliefs, thoughts, and actions of their children. Our job as a parent is to help our kids, and all children have this naturally self-centered existence to start their lives, and our job is to help them begin to pull their focus off of themselves and begin to see how their lives are connected and impact those around them. It would certainly be very easy, and I've seen parents that try to do this, to just do nothing to challenge. Do nothing to call kids out of their self-centeredness. But because we love them, we understand that this isn't a healthy way for them to live their lives and enter the world as adults. So we do things like we challenge and we teach and we hold them accountable and we call them to something better, a better story for their lives, because we love them. Because God loves you, he is calling you to a better story for your life. He's calling you to be a part of his story, the ultimate story. It's a story that begins with disruption as he calls us to repentance, which is an acknowledgement that we're sinners and we need to turn from that sin and turn to Christ. And it's a call to continued disruption as God continues the work of making us more like his son. All of this disruption is an act of love from God as he seeks to disrupt the lesser stories of our lives and calls us to a greater story. The gift of Jesus is meant to change us. One of my favorite quotes from a pastor and author by the name of Sam Allberry, he says this, "But the fact is that the gospel demands everything out of all of us. If someone thinks that the gospel has somehow slotted into their life quite easily, without causing any major adjustments to their lifestyle or aspirations, it is likely that they have not really started following Jesus at all." If Jesus hasn't changed us, we may not actually be following him. As we close this Advent season, consider this. The gift of Jesus does not neatly fit into our lives and our expectations. It disrupts, it challenges, and it changes everything. But more than anything, it's a gift rooted in God's unfailing love, a gift that we could never earn and we can never outgrow. When the Magi came to worship Jesus, they didn't leave the same as when they arrived. They encountered the King of Kings, and their journey home took a different route. The same is true for us. An encounter with Jesus sets us on a new path, one shaped by surrender, trust, and hope. So this week, as you reflect on the close of another year, you look forward to a new one, some things to ask yourself. What would it look like for me to truly receive the disruptive gift of Jesus in my life? And how is God calling me to step into his better story with faith and courage and trust? The greatest gifts in life are often the most disruptive because they are the most transformative. So my prayer is that we leave here today with hearts open to the disruption of love that God offers through Jesus and ready to walk the path that he sets before us with trust and joy. Would you pray with me?